They thought I was gone. They thought I was irrelevant, but I still had one thing: they could never automate my voice. For 33 years, I poured my soul into my work at Evergreen Systems. When they let me go, replacing me with a machine, they thought it was the end of my story. What they didn't know was that I had been quietly documenting everything, the secrets they thought were safe, the lives they destroyed to climb higher. From the moment I stepped into that office back in 1990, I knew the stakes. I wasn't just working for a paycheck. I was building a life for myself and my daughter, divorced, struggling. I vowed to prove I could stand on my own 2 feet without asking anyone for help. And I did. But despite my dedication, despite the countless hours I put in, my loyalty didn't matter. The day they replaced me with a cold, heartless AI named Claire, I walked into the office to find my desk gone, my belongings erased as though I'd never mattered. It felt like a punch to the gut. But what they didn't realize was that I had been quietly preparing for this moment. They had underestimated me, just as they had underestimated every woman of color they erased from the company over the years. But I remembered. I remembered the lies, the manipulations, the moments when they thought I was just a quiet observer. In reality, I was keeping track of everything they wished they could bury. And now, after being tossed aside, I was about to show them that the one thing they could never take away from me was the truth. I had worked at Evergreen Systems for 33 years, a company that had once been full of hope and promise. Back in 1990, when I started, the office was a different place. We had floppy disks and coffee pots older than most of us, but there was something genuine about it all. The CEO would still shake your hand firmly, like he actually cared. I was 33, newly divorced, and determined to build a life for myself and my daughter. The job quickly became my second home. I stayed late without being asked. I learned every new system that came my way, and I trained young interns who eventually grew into directors. Not once did I ask for more than I earned. People often said, "Dolores, you always know what's going on." And I did. I knew who was sleeping with whom, who was padding their travel reimbursements, and who cried in the break room. I knew who snuck liquor into their desk drawers. I was the wallflower, the one nobody noticed, but also the one nobody bothered to hide from. They thought I was harmless. Maybe I was, at least until the day they tossed me out like last week's lunch order. It happened on a Monday. I showed up early, like I always did, wearing my navy cardigan and sensible shoes, a tray of banana muffins I had baked for the front desk staff in hand. I had barely stepped off the elevator when I noticed it. My desk was gone, not just moved gone. In its place was a sleek, white kiosk with a glowing interface and a sign that read, "Claire Corporate Learning AI Response Engine." At first, I thought it was a joke. Maybe they were renovating. But as I walked through the floor, I realized my personal items were gone. My photos, my plants, my pencil holder, everything had vanished. I marched straight to Brent Halverson's office, the new CEO, a man who was all teeth and tech jargon, the kind of man who could fire an entire department without a second thought and still be on time for a podcast about innovation. When I walked in, he didn't even look surprised. "Miss Mayfield," he said, that thin smile of his barely reaching his eyes. "I figured you'd stop by." "Where's my desk?" I asked, my voice calm. I didn't need to raise it to be heard. "We've made a strategic pivot," he said, leaning back in his chair like he was about to impart some grand revelation. "We're moving towards automation. AI can handle customer support, scheduling, data entry, and dignity." I cut him off before he could finish. Am I being fired? We're sunsetting your role. He replied, using the corporate buzzword that made me feel even more disposable. But we're happy to offer you a thank you bonus for your years of loyalty. Loyalty. 33 years of loyalty. And this was what I got. No write-up. Not a single complaint on my record. I ran that front office like a ship. I caught errors in invoices that saved them hundreds of thousands. And now, a talking computer named Claire had my job. Who made the decision, I asked. Monica and I, he said, not even looking ashamed. Monica. The snake behind the curtain. The one who was always polite and smiling, ready to throw anyone under the bus as long as it made her look better. She had once told a group of interns that old employees were like wallpaper, familiar but easily replaced. I remembered it well because I was standing right behind her when she said it. Brent leaned back in his chair as though he had just performed some noble act. You'll be fine, Miss Mayfield. People like you always find something. People like me. I was a 66-year-old black woman in a tech company that hadn't hired anyone over 50 in years. They didn't think I could code. They didn't think I would fight. And they certainly didn't think I would remember everything. I packed up my things in silence. My photos, my coffee mug, the worn-out notebook I kept in my drawer. What Brent and Monica didn't know was that inside that notebook was my true resume notes. Names, dates, things I had overheard, things I was never supposed to hear. That notebook wasn't just a journal, it was evidence. And if they thought firing me was the end of the story, they clearly hadn't read the first chapter. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and opened the notebook. It took me 2 full days to read through it, cover to cover. I hadn't realized how much I had documented over the years, everything from whispered slurs to harassment reports that had been buried, ignored, or erased. I had always thought I was just coping, keeping track to maintain some sense of control. But now, I saw it for what it really was, a record, a ledger of all the wrongdoings this company had been built on. I made a pot of Corey coffee and took a deep breath before dialing Harriet Boone. She had been the head of HR for 12 years before Monica bullied her into early retirement. Harriet was my closest friend, and the one person I trusted to remember everything the way I did. Dolores, she said when she picked up. Lord, it's been a minute. You all right? They fired me, I said, my voice steady but full of rage. They replaced me with an AI interface named Claire. She was silent for a moment. Then, with a sigh, she said, Brent and Monica. Of course, that woman's been scheming to erase anyone with a conscience since she got the corner office. I need to talk to you, I said, and not over the phone. The next morning, I showed up at her house with my notebook, a lemon pound cake, and a bottle of sweet red wine. We sat at her kitchen table, just like we used to back when our daughters were young, and our backs didn't ache. I told her everything about Claire, about Brent's cold smile when he fired me, and about Monica's silence. Then, I opened my notebook and let Harriet read it. She took her time, flipping through the pages slowly, her jaw tightening with each entry. When she reached the entry about Lucia, a young Latina intern who had been assaulted by her manager and then disappeared after Monica took over, she stopped cold. I remember her, Harriet said, her voice thick with emotion. She came to me crying, said her manager tried to put his hands on her after asking her to stay late. I filed a report, but Monica took over. And then she was gone. I nodded. That's why I called you. You and I remember what they're hoping people have forgotten, and that was just the beginning. It was clear to me that they had underestimated me from the very beginning. Brent Halverson, the new CEO, was a man who had everything mapped out for the future. He had the vision of where he wanted to take Evergreen Systems. And unfortunately, I was no longer part of that future. He thought I would leave quietly after he handed me my pink slip. But I had something in my possession that he didn't count on the years of documentation I had kept in my notebook. Everything that they thought they could erase or ignore. I had always been quiet, the one who stayed behind the scenes, never causing a stir, never demanding recognition. But while I stayed in the shadows, I was paying attention. Over the years, I had witnessed countless injustices, big and small, that had been swept under the rug. From the women who were harassed to those whose voices were silenced because they weren't part of the new corporate world Brent and Monica were building. And now, I had the perfect opportunity to make sure these stories were told. As I sat at my kitchen table that night, rereading my notes, I realized just how much I had documented. It was like a complete history of Evergreen Systems, except it wasn't just about the projects, the meetings, or the day-to-day tasks. No, my notes were about the people, the ones who had suffered quietly while the company continued to grow, the ones who were erased by a system that didn't care about their pain. I had written down names, dates, events, whispers in the hallways, things no one was supposed to hear. I flipped through the pages, each entry a reminder of the people they had forgotten. There was Jasmine, the admin who had been crying in the break room one day in 1991. She had confided in me about her experience with Mr. Leland, a senior executive who had touched her inappropriately. The investigation lasted for a week, and then Jasmine was gone. Just like that. A few pages later, in 1998, Monica had proudly declared that the old guard was dead weight, that the senior staff were bad optics for a tech company. I'd stood behind her when she said it, but I'd never forgotten it. But the worst entries were the ones about the women who had been forced into silence, who had been ignored, or worse, erased entirely. Monica and Brent thought they were pulling the wool over everyone's eyes, but they hadn't counted on me remembering. I had witnessed the way they pushed out the older staff, the ones who had built the company from the ground up. And I had witnessed their treatment of the women, how they ignored complaints about sexual harassment and racial discrimination, how they used their power to shut people down, to manipulate the system in their favor. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me as I thought about everything they had taken from me, everything they had taken from these women. But what angered me even more was how they thought they had won by replacing me with an AI, by replacing everything I had worked for with a soulless machine. They thought they could erase me, but they couldn't. Not with my notebook, not with my memories, not with the truth. I knew it was time to make my move. The first person I called was Harriet Boone, my closest friend and the former head of HR at Evergreen. She had retired early after Monica bullied her out, but she hadn't forgotten anything either. I needed her to help me connect the dots, to back up the claims I had written in my notebook, and I needed her to help me get the evidence into the right hands, people who could make sure this wasn't swept under the rug like everything else had been. Harriet answered the phone on the first ring. Dolores. It's been a while. What's going on? She asked. They fired me today, I said, my voice flat. They replaced me with an AI system, a machine called Claire. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before she spoke. Brent and Monica. She sighed. Of course, that woman's been scheming to erase anyone with a conscience since she got the corner office. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I need to talk to you in person, I said. I need you to help me get what I've documented into the right hands. The next morning, I showed up at Harriet's house with my notebook, a lemon pound cake, and a bottle of sweet red wine. We sat at her kitchen table, just like we used to when we were younger. I told her everything about Claire, about Brent's cold demeanor when he fired me, about Monica's ever-present smile hiding her true nature. And then I opened the notebook and let Harriet read. She took her time, flipping through the pages slowly, her expression darkening as she read. When she got to the entry about Lucia, a young Latina intern who had filed a report about being assaulted by her manager, she stopped. "I remember her," Harriet said, her voice thick with emotion. "She came to me crying, said her manager had tried to put his hands on her. I filed a report, but Monica took over, and then Lucia was gone." I nodded. "That's why I called you. We're the only ones who remember, and I'm not going to let them erase it. I had always thought my notes were just a way of coping, a way to maintain some control over my world. But now, I saw them for what they truly were, a weapon, and I was going to use it to fight back. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had been playing a dangerous game all these years, and yet I had no choice but to continue. I wasn't just an employee at Evergreen Systems, I was a witness. I had seen what they had done to people, and I couldn't turn my back now. Brent Halverson and Monica had thought that by replacing me with an AI, they could erase me, but they had no idea that I wasn't going to go quietly into the night. I had always been a silent observer. I knew things about the company that others didn't. Things I had learned not through direct conversations, but by paying attention. Who was having an affair with whom? Who padded their travel expenses? Who was using the company's resources for personal gain? They thought I didn't notice these things, but I did. And now, those observations, those small whispers in the hallways, were the ammunition I needed. What made it all worse was how they had discarded me without even a second thought. I had given them over 3 decades of my life, 33 years of my sweat, my loyalty, my work, and they had tossed me aside like yesterday's lunch. It hurt, but I had been preparing for this moment for years. When I had first started working at Evergreen, I had realized early on that the world didn't care about women like me, especially women of color. The system was built to discard us when we were no longer useful, and I had seen it happen time and time again. But what they didn't know was that while they thought they were using me, I had been gathering evidence. I remember the day they let me go so clearly. I had walked into the office like I had done every other day, early, bringing banana muffins for the front desk staff, just a simple gesture of kindness. But when I stepped out of the elevator, it hit me. My desk was gone, and in its place was a sleek white kiosk with a glowing interface. There was no sign of the personal touches that had made my desk mine. No pictures, no plants, nothing, just an empty space where my life had been. At first, I thought it was a joke, but when I walked around, I saw the truth. They had erased me, and not just physically. They had erased my contributions, my decades of loyalty. I marched straight to Brent Halverson's office, the man who now ran the company. He greeted me with that same cold smile, but his eyes never showed any emotion. "Miss Mayfield," he said, "I figured you'd stop by." There was no apology, no recognition of the years I had put in, just a statement that we were sunsetting my role. When I asked who had made this decision, he said it was him and Monica. I knew what that meant. Monica was the real power behind the scenes, the one who had always played the game, the one who had smiled while throwing people under the bus. I didn't need to yell to be heard. My voice was steady as I asked him, "Who made the decision, Monica and I?" he said, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. Monica had always been the one to manipulate the system, to get rid of anyone who had too much of a conscience. I packed up my things in silence, not shedding a single tear. My desk was gone, but my memories weren't. The notebook I had kept over the years was still in my hands, and in that notebook were the secrets, the things I had written down, things that no one thought would ever come to light. I had learned a long time ago that when the system is built to erase people like me, the only way to fight back is to make sure the truth can't be erased. I didn't know exactly what my next move would be, but I knew I wasn't going to let them get away with it. They thought they could replace me with an AI, a machine that would never be able to care for the people, the employees, the real backbone of the company. But I was ready to remind them what they had forgotten. People like me were never really gone. We just bend, and when we snap back, we cut deep. As I sat in the quiet of my kitchen that night, the weight of everything I had learned over the years seemed to press down on me all at once. I wasn't just an old employee being replaced by an AI. I was a witness, a keeper of secrets, someone who had seen the dark side of evergreen systems, and now I had the chance to expose it. The company had thought that replacing me with a machine would be the end of the story. They didn't realize I had been silently documenting every injustice, every lie, every wrong done to those who didn't have the voice or the power to fight back. It all came rushing back to me as I flipped through the pages of my notebook. From the first day I had walked through those doors, I had been watching, listening. People thought I didn't know what was going on, but I did. I knew who was sleeping with whom, who was taking money from the company, who had been cornered in the hallway and forced to keep quiet. And I knew how the company handled complaints by erasing them, burying them so deep that no one would ever question the perfect facade they had created. I had learned long ago that if I wanted to survive in a place like this, I had to be invisible. I had to blend in, keep my head down, and never ask for more than what was given to me. But that didn't mean I wasn't paying attention. Every whispered conversation, every moment of injustice, I had documented it all. It wasn't just for me. It was for the women like Jasmine, like Lucia, like all the others who had been pushed aside, erased, or silenced. When they fired me, I thought it was over. I thought they had won. But what they didn't know was that I had been collecting evidence, keeping track of everything I had seen and heard. They thought they could erase me, but I wasn't gone. Not by a long shot. I had made sure that the truth was written down, even if they tried to bury it. And now, that truth was going to be heard. The first person I reached out to was Harriet Boone. She had been the head of HR for years before Monica had bullied her into early retirement. Harriet was the one person who could understand what I was about to do. The one person who knew the company's inner workings as well as I did. When I called her, she knew something was wrong before I even said a word. Dolores, she said when she picked up the phone. What's going on? I haven't heard from you in so long. They fired me. I said, replaced me with a damn AI. She was silent for a moment, and then I heard her sigh. Of course, Brent and Monica, they've been waiting for this, haven't they? Well, we both know what happens next. I'm with you, Dolores. You've always had the courage to do the right thing, and you're not done yet. That was all I needed to hear. I knew I had to meet her in person. So the next morning, I packed up my notebook, a fresh lemon pound cake because old habits die hard, and a bottle of sweet red wine, and I drove to her house. Harriet's little brick bungalow on the east side was a world away from the cold. corporate halls of evergreen systems. It was quiet there, peaceful, but there was a storm brewing inside me, and I could feel it building as I sat down at her kitchen table. We talked for hours, going over everything. I told her about Claire, the AI that had replaced me, and how Brent and Monica had smiled like they had won, but they didn't know what I had kept hidden all these years. When I opened my notebook to let her read, she took her time, flipping through the pages slowly, her face growing darker with each one. When she got to the entry about Lucia, a young Latina intern who had filed a report about sexual harassment, she stopped cold. "I remember her," Harriet said quietly. She came to me crying. Said her manager tried to force her to stay late and then made an advance. I filed a report, but Monica took it over, and then she was gone, disappeared. I remember her so clearly, but I didn't know what happened to her. I nodded, my heart heavy. Monica erased her, just like she erased so many others. "I'm not going to let them get away with it." Harriet nodded. "We've got work to do, and I think I know exactly where to start." That was the moment I knew I wasn't alone in this fight. I had Harriet by my side, and together we could expose the truth that had been hidden for so long, the truth that Brent and Monica thought they could bury under the weight of their own ambition. We began to make a plan. I needed to gather everything. I had my notes, the reports, the evidence of what had happened behind closed doors, and I needed to get it into the hands of someone who could do something about it, someone who could make sure the world knew what they had done. The next day, I made a phone call that would change everything. I reached out to a journalist I had heard about over the years, a woman who had a reputation for bringing down the most powerful men with their lies. Her name was Raina Dubose, and if anyone could help me expose the truth, it was her. It was time to finally make my voice heard. The weight of the notebook in my hands felt like a lifeline. I had spent years quietly observing the injustices at Evergreen Systems, and now, as I flipped through those pages, it became clear that this wasn't just a personal record. This was a treasure trove of truth. I had witnessed everything, the subtle betrayals, the lies that had been told, and most of all, the erasure of people, especially women, who had been discarded by the very company they had once poured their lives into. I wasn't just bitter over losing my job, although that was a part of it. What hurt more was how easily they had tossed me aside, thinking I was just another cog in the machine. They replaced me with Claire, an AI, something that couldn't feel or care for the people it was designed to serve. But they had no idea what they were dealing with. I wasn't just some forgotten employee. I had been collecting their secrets, and now I was about to make sure the world heard them. Harriet had been by my side through it all. When I called her that night, I knew I needed her to help me get this evidence into the right hands. She had always been the one I could trust, even when the company had pushed her out. After Monica bullied her into early retirement, I had always felt like it was only a matter of time before they came for me too. I wasn't naive enough to believe I could last forever in a place that was so determined to erase people like me. But now that it had happened, I felt something shift inside me. The anger that had been simmering for years, the frustration, it was finally coming to the surface. We arranged to meet the next day, and I drove to Harriet's house with the notebook in hand, along with a bottle of sweet red wine and a freshly baked lemon pound cake. It was a small gesture, but one that reminded me of the days when we would sit at her kitchen table and talk about our dreams for the future. Those days felt like a lifetime ago. The world had changed, and so had I. When I sat down across from her, I didn't waste any time. I opened the notebook and began reading aloud the entries that I knew would expose the truth. I spoke about Lucia, the young intern who had been sexually harassed and then quietly disappeared after Monica took over her case. I spoke about Jasmine, the administrative assistant who had been made to feel as if her voice didn't matter, and I spoke about every other woman who had been silenced, erased, or simply pushed out of the company. Each story was a reminder of the culture that had been allowed to thrive at Evergreen Systems, a culture of complacency, of blind ambition, and of a complete disregard for the people who made the company what it was. As I read, I could see the emotion on Harriet's face. She had been the head of HR for so many years, and she had seen it all. The manipulation, the way Monica would smooth things over with a smile while pushing out the employees who dared to question the company's practices. Harriet had always been strong, but even she seemed shaken by what we were about to do. She had kept records, too. She had filed formal complaints that had never seen the light of day, buried in the same way the company had buried the truth. But now, it wasn't just about her career or mine. This was bigger than us. "I've kept copies of everything," Harriet said softly, after a long silence. "I knew one day this would come back to bite them. I just didn't know it would be you who would take them down." It was then that I knew we were ready. Harriet went to a locked drawer in her bedroom and pulled out a metal file box. Inside were the formal grievances that Monica had worked so hard to bury, some of them from women of color who had been targeted and silenced. There were documents of settlements that had been paid out without any public record, women who had been forced to sign non-disclosure agreements just to get by. I sat there, stunned by the sheer amount of evidence we had. But I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. Instead, I felt a kind of determination, a resolve that I hadn't felt before. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about making sure that no one else had to go through what I had. "What now?" Harriet asked. "Now, we make sure the world knows," I said quietly. "We take it to the right people, people who can make a difference." I reached for my phone and dialed the number of a journalist I had been following for years. Her name was Raina Duboshe, an investigative reporter known for uncovering the most powerful secrets of the corporate world. If anyone could help us bring this to light, it was her. The phone rang once, then twice. Finally, she answered. "Raina Duboshe," she said, her voice sharp and direct. "I need your help," I said, "and I have something that's going to make your blood run cold." The more I read through the pages of my notebook, the more I realized how deeply this went. I had documented the company's darkest secrets over the years. What had once been a quiet form of self-preservation had turned into a powerful weapon. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all the others who had been pushed aside, silenced, and erased. I couldn't let them get away with it. The faces of the women who had come to me, desperate and broken, flashed in my mind. They deserved justice, and I was going to give it to them. Harriet and I sat in her kitchen, the weight of the truth between us. I had opened the notebook, sharing the painful details of everything I had witnessed. Names, dates, events, Monica's manipulations, Brent's blind ambition, and the lives they had ruined in the name of progress. We went through the evidence methodically, and with every page we turned, it became clearer. This wasn't just about me losing my job. This was about a system that had been built to protect the powerful and silence the vulnerable. I was determined to expose them, to ensure that those who had been dismissed, humiliated, and discarded had their voices heard. I knew the risks exposing this kind of corruption could destroy me, But at this point, I had nothing left to lose. The damage had already been done. "What's the next step?" Harriet asked, her voice steady but tinged with the same anger I felt. She had always been my confidant, but now we were partners in this fight. We need someone who can get this into the right hands. I said, someone who isn't afraid to take on the corporate giants. Someone who can tell the world what really happened. I had one person in mind, a woman who had taken down some of the most powerful men in the corporate world with nothing more than her sharp mind and an unwavering commitment to the truth. Raina Dubois. I'd been following her work for years. Her investigative reporting had uncovered corruption, abuse, and betrayal in some of the country's largest corporations. If anyone could help me bring Evergreen's dark side to light, it was her. I dialed her number without hesitation, my heart pounding as I waited for her to answer. When she did, her voice was as crisp and direct as always. "Raina Dubois," she said. "I need your help," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "And I have something that's going to shake you to your core." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, "I'm listening." I explained everything, how I had worked at Evergreen Systems for over 3 decades, how they had replaced me with an AI system, and how I had been quietly documenting everything for years. I told her about the women who had come to me for help and were silenced, erased, and discarded. I told her about the corruption that had festered under Brent and Monica's leadership, the way they had used their power to manipulate and control. And I told her about the notebook, the one that held all the evidence. Raina was silent for a moment, absorbing everything I had just shared. "This is big," she said finally, "but it sounds like exactly the kind of story that needs to be told." "I'm ready to tell it," I said, my resolve hardening, "but I need you to help me get it out there. I can't do this alone." "Don't worry," Raina replied. "We'll make sure the world knows what happened. They won't be able to erase this." The weight that had been pressing down on my chest for days suddenly lifted. I wasn't alone anymore. I had someone who believed in this fight, who understood the magnitude of what we were about to do. And with Raina's help, we were going to take down the system that had been built to protect the guilty and silence the innocent. I hung up the phone and looked over at Harriet, who was watching me intently. She nodded, a silent agreement passing between us. The fight was far from over, but we had a plan. And for the first time since I had been fired, I felt a spark of hope ignite in me. This wasn't just about reclaiming my dignity. This was about exposing the truth, about making sure those who had been silenced for far too long had their voices heard. We were just getting started. After I left Evergreen Systems, carrying with me all the notes and evidence of the company's wrongdoings, I realized something vital. Nothing can erase the power of truth. They thought they could replace me, erase me with an AI system. But the truth I had documented over 3 decades became my weapon. Sometimes, silence is not surrender. It's a strategy, a way to gather strength, a way to prepare for the moment when you can stand tall and show the world what's been hidden. The lesson I want to share is this: never underestimate the power of patience and preparation. What you do today, no matter how small it seems, can make all the difference tomorrow. Don't be afraid to stand up for the truth, even when it feels like no one is listening and you're standing alone. Eventually, truth will find its way to the surface, and when it does, no one will be able to deny it. If you feel this story resonates with you, please share it and leave your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more inspiring stories and life lessons. The truth will never be erased, and I am living proof of that.